We'll start off by making sure we select the appropriate template that's in the flowchart area and select Microsoft SharePoint Workflow, which is important because that's the only stencil you can use when creating these processes that will go into SharePoint. One important piece here that should look very familiar is the idea of the actions and conditions. If you've used SharePoint Designer at all, then these types of concepts will be very familiar to you. And you can see the various pieces that will be in here that are very similar to those that are in SharePoint Designer. So let's start off by making sure we have a Start button here. And that is important for every workflow because it has a starting and an end, which is the Terminate button you see there. In this case, our very first step will be to log to the history list. Now, logging to the history list is something that's important because that will keep everything updated along the way. You'll probably want to use log to history list many times throughout your process, and the bigger the process is, the more you'll want to have this so that you can constantly be updating things along the way. Let's jump ahead to an already created one here. And for those of you that watched my last blog or read through it, this should look very familiar to you. It's that basic approve, decline, rework process laid out here. You can see every step of the way. Now what we need to do, once we've created it in Visio and we're ready to share it, we need to export it. So we'll go up to Process and Export, and go ahead and give it a name so that we can track it. Call this one Approval Workflow, and save it. Now that's going to save in the Visio Workflow Interchange file format. That'll be important once we want to import it. We can also check the diagram here if we aren't exporting it yet, but we want to just check for errors, etc. Just run check diagram, and it'll tell us if we have errors involved in that process at all. At this point, I can open my trusty SharePoint Designer application and open the SharePoint site that we're going to be working with. Switch over to the Workflows area and go ahead and import from Visio. I can browse to where I saved that VWI file we just created, and next choose what type of actual workflow we're going to be creating. In this case, we want to create a reusable workflow, but I can also create it of various types or tie it to a list, etc. Now that we have it inside of SharePoint Designer, the very first thing I'll notice are all the pieces that are blue. All the pieces that are blue represent a work item for me to go in and add values or add commands, such as logging specific messages to the history list, adding in specific email addresses, the content of the email, who's going to be involved, what is it logging, when, where, all those types of things. So each step is going to require me to go in and perform some type of action to fill in data. For instance, in this log message to the workflow history list, I need to click on that and then use the string builder to go ahead and fill in that particular message. So let's see how that particular step goes. As we see here, using the string builder, I can just tell it that the approval workflow started by such and such on a particular item was started, so that we add some context to the history list for what workflows are starting, give them some context around what's involved with the workflow, etc. For those of you that have used SharePoint Designer before, the string builder and the various lookups should be very much in line with what you're used to.